Okay, we're just starting a little mini unit on the different properties of multiplication. And since this is new to us, I thought that I would make a little video so the students can refer back when they're working on their assignments and they can figure out which property may help them solve a particular algebraic expression or simplify an algebraic expression. The first one that I'm going to talk about is the commutative property. Now, commutative is sometimes called the moving property. Commutative property is sometimes called the moving property, and the reason we call it that is because you can move factors around and it will not affect the product when you evaluate your algebraic expression or whatever. So, let's look at an example. Let's say we've got a situation where we have 9 times 2y squared times 3. If I want to, I can move those around and solve that problem perhaps quicker. Now, usually I mentally move them around. Like I would look at the 9 and I would solve it. I would say 9 times 3. Mentally I would do that, but you can also rewrite it and using the commutative property, move it around that way where you write it in such an arrangement on your paper. Now, another property of multiplication we're going to be working with today is called the associative property. And I'll write that down here. And sometimes you might hear people refer to associative property as a grouping property. Like, let's say, for instance, we have 9 times, and in parentheses, 2y squared times 3. Now, if we were working with an expression that had different operations, not just multiplication, we could not do this. We would have to solve first what's in parentheses and follow our order of operations. But because all of the operations in this expression are multiplication, we can group them any way we want. For instance, I'm not bound by these parentheses. If I wanted to, I could say 2y squared times the product of 9 and 3. And by grouping it that way, I might be able to solve it easier. 2y squared times 27, and then I would go ahead and multiply 27 by 2 and get 54y squared. But I'll stop there. I just wanted to show you that with associative property of multiplication, you can group them any way you want, the factors, and still get the same product. Now, our next one we're going to talk about is the identity property. Our identity property of multiplication is different from the identity property of addition. The identity property of addition would be 0, because anytime you add 0 to a number, your sum will be the number you start out with. With our identity property of multiplication, we have to look at what value can you multiply any factor by and not change the value of your factor, and that's going to be 1. 1 is sometimes referred to as the multiplicative identity. Now, one of the things I want to mention to my students is 1 might be represented like that, the number 1, or it could be perhaps a form of 1, such as 3 over 3. 3 over 3 is equal to a whole, or 1. So anytime you have a situation where you have 1 involved like that, where you're multiplying by 1, that is the identity property that's being put into play. Okay, and let's talk about another property. It's called the zero property of multiplication. And with the zero property, anytime you multiply a factor by 0, your product will be 0. And sometimes, though, kids will look at an expression and they'll see that times 0 and they'll want to automatically assume that the whole expression is 0. Now, I'll show you an example. Let's say that we have 9 plus 2 times 3y times 0. They might see something like that, and they see 0 times them with 0, and they'll want to say 0. And that's not necessarily the case. It's not, because you have this 9 plus. So even if you said 0 times 3y and got 0, and 0 times 2 and got 0, it would then be 0 plus 9, and you would wind up with 9. So that is the 0 property of multiplication. And then there's one more property of multiplication that's very special. It's called the distributive property. And with the distributive property of multiplication, that's going to come into play when you can, for instance, work with a grouping in parentheses, and you have another number, another value that's right up against those parentheses. For instance, let's say that we've got 3 times the sum of 27 plus 36. Now, because of distributive property, I don't have to wait and just say 27 plus 36 and then times that sum by 3. I could simply times the 27 by 3, I could times the 36 by 3, and then just add those together and get my final answer. Now, that is just that's some of the properties of multiplication that we're going to be working with this little unit, and I wanted to share those with my students. I hope that this has helped them, and as they are working on some of these expressions with multiplication, they'll be able to identify a property that can help them evaluate the expression.